been unloading boxes like he owns the place.
Sir, stop right there. Put the box down.
What are you doing at this property?
All right.
He doesn't belong here. I already called 911.
Sir, we're going to need you to step away from the property.
You might want to take a closer look, officer, because you're speaking to your new police chief.
Oh.
Wait, what?
Marcus Bennett arrived on Sycamore Ridge Drive at 8:47 on a Saturday morning, dressed the way anyone dresses on moving day: tan polo, dark jeans, work boots. Nothing on him identified him as a law enforcement officer of any rank, because nothing needed to. He was a man moving into his home. The deed in his glove compartment, the keys in his pocket, and the address on the side of the truck were all the identification a free citizen should ever need. He had chosen this neighborhood deliberately, not for status, because Sycamore Ridge Drive sat inside the district with the highest ratio of civilian complaints against his own officers, and Marcus Bennett believed a leader should live with the consequences of the institution he leads. 3 days earlier, the mayor had shaken his hand and handed him the commission. Chief of Police, effective immediately. Across the street, a curtain moved. Deborah Collins had already been watching for 11 minutes. In 31 years on this street, she had called the non-emergency line 14 times about suspicious individuals. Every single one was black. Every single complaint was closed without charges. This time, she didn't use the non-emergency line. She dialed 911 and reported an active break-in in progress. What Deborah didn't know, what none of them would know until it was too late, was that the man in that driveway was about to become the most consequential person in all of their lives. The gold badge in his back pocket would not just end the confrontation. It would end careers, trigger a lawsuit, expose 31 years of discriminatory reporting, and launch a reform that would change policing in Hargrove forever. Here is the complete text from the document. Marcus Bennett had been a police officer for 22 years, and in that time he had learned to read rooms. He could walk into a domestic disturbance and know within 30 seconds who was lying, who was afraid, and who needed to be removed before someone got hurt. He could sit across from a homicide suspect and wait, just wait, hands folded, eyes steady, until the silence became unbearable and the truth came spilling out. He had read hundreds of rooms, in hundreds of circumstances, and he had never once walked away from one unsure of what he'd seen. But on this particular Saturday morning, what he was reading was not a room. It was a street, a wide, sun-washed cul-de-sac, lined with brick homes and manicured lawns, and the kind of deliberate quiet that takes serious money to maintain. Sycamore Ridge Drive. He had driven down it a dozen times in the past 6 weeks, first to tour the house, then to sign the papers, then just to sit in his car for a few minutes and let the reality of it settle over him. He owned a home here now. After 22 years of apartment leases and rented rooms and temporary postings that had kept him moving every few years, he had finally planted a flag somewhere permanent. He was not a man given to sentimentality. But this was not just real estate. His father had worked 40 years as a maintenance supervisor for a city that never once promoted him, and died in a 2-bedroom rental with a leaky roof. His mother had cleaned houses in neighborhoods exactly like this one. Marcus had sworn quietly as a young man that he would one day own something that could not be taken from him, that he would put his name on a piece of land and let the world try to argue with the paperwork. He had closed on 14 Sycamore Ridge Drive 6 weeks ago, paid in full. His name was on the deed, the title, and the county property record. He had framed the closing document the night he signed it, and placed it carefully in the first box he loaded into the truck that morning. He put it there on purpose. He wanted it to be the first thing he carried across the threshold. He had been lifting boxes for about 20 minutes when he noticed the curtain move in the house, directly across the street. Deborah Collins had lived at 11 Sycamore Ridge Drive for 31 years. She had watched the neighborhood shift over those decades in ways she considered acceptable and ways she did not. She had chaired every HOA meeting for 9 consecutive years and prided herself, genuinely and without irony, on knowing this street, on knowing who belonged here and who didn't. She had called the non-emergency line 14 times over the years about suspicious individuals, and she would have told you, if asked, that every single call had been completely warranted. She would not have told you, because she had never examined it long enough to notice, that every single person she had reported in 31 years was black. She spotted the moving truck at 8:51 in the morning. She was at her kitchen window with a cup of coffee when it pulled up to 14 Sycamore Ridge Drive, and her first thought was that nobody at the last HOA meeting had mentioned new residents. Her second thought, arriving so quickly that it didn't feel like a thought at all, just an instinct, just a fact, was that the man climbing out of the cab of that truck did not look like he belonged on Sycamore Ridge Drive. She set down her coffee. She picked up her phone. She did not call the property management office, though that would have taken 30 seconds and answered every question she had. She did not walk across the street and introduce herself, though that also would have taken 30 seconds and answered every question she had. Instead, she stood at her kitchen window for 11 minutes, watching the man carry boxes into the house, and she photographed him 3 times, and she rehearsed the words she planned to use when she crossed that street. Deborah Collins had appointed herself the guardian of this cul-de-sac 31 years ago. She was not about to abdicate that role now. Marcus was on his 4th box when he heard the sharp click of heels on the driveway behind him. He turned. A white woman in her late 60s was crossing the street toward him, with the posture of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to end. "Excuse me," she said, though her tone made absolutely clear that she was not asking for anything. "What are you doing here?" Marcus set the box down. Slowly, deliberately. He had been in this situation before. Not here, not on this street, but in enough other contexts that his body knew the protocol. "Slow your movements. Keep your hands visible. Keep your voice measured." "I'm moving in," he said. "I own this house." She looked at the truck, then at him, then at the house, as though the property itself might weigh in on the dispute. "I'm the HOA chair," she said. "I should have been notified of any new residents." "You were," Marcus said. "I submitted all required documentation 5 weeks ago. I have the confirmation on file." "I'd like to see your documentation," she said. Not a request. He could have walked inside and closed the door. He had that right. Instead, because 22 years in law enforcement had made de-escalation a reflex, he went to the cab of the truck, retrieved the folder from the glove compartment, and presented it to her. The deed. The purchase agreement. The county title record, with his full legal name printed at the top of the page. She held the papers for a long moment, studying them with the expression of a woman determined to find a flaw. "These could be fake," she said. Marcus looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry?" "Forgeries. I've seen them before." She had not seen them before. "I'm calling the police." He watched her dial. He did not try to stop her. He stood in his own driveway, on his own property, holding documents with his name on them. And he watched Deborah Collins call 911 and report, in a voice that was controlled and certain, that there was a black male attempting to burglarize a property on Sycamore Ridge Drive, that he had presented what appeared to be false documentation, and that she believed he could be dangerous. Marcus put the folder back under his arm. He folded his hands. He waited. If you've ever had to prove you belong somewhere that was completely and legally yours, drop a comment below. You are not alone in this. Stay with us, because what happens next is about to change everything. Officers Daniel Carter and Luis Rodriguez arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Marcus clocked it automatically, a 22-year habit from writing incident reports. He also noted that both officers stepped out of the cruiser, with their hands already pre-positioned, already primed, already reading the scene through the lens of a 911 caller's voice, rather than through what was actually in front of them. Carter spoke first. He was young, mid-20s, with the tight posture of someone who had graduated the academy recently enough that the training still hadn't fully relaxed into instinct. "Sir, step away from the truck. What's your business at this address?" "I own this address," Marcus said calmly. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I have the deed and title in this folder." He held it up with both hands visible. "I'm happy to show you." Carter glanced at Deborah Collins. She gave a small, firm shake of her head. That glance, that single, reflexive rotation of a young officer's eyes toward the white complainant instead of toward the documentation being offered, told Marcus exactly how the next few minutes were going to unfold if he didn't change them himself. Rodriguez moved to his left to broaden officer coverage. Standard positioning for a potentially combative subject. Marcus recognized it immediately because he had written the training protocol that prescribed it. He was standing inside a tactical formation he had personally helped design. "We've received a report of a break-in in progress," Carter said. "We're going to need you to come with us while we sort this out." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said. His voice was calm. The particular preternaturally steady calm of a man who has decided, with complete clarity, exactly how far he is willing to let this go. "I am standing in my own driveway. I have presented my documentation. I am asking you to look at it." Carter didn't look at the folder. "Sir, I won't ask again. You need to come." "Hold on," Marcus said quietly. "Before you finish that sentence, I need you to look at something." He reached slowly, deliberately, with every movement narrated by the stillness of his hands, into his back pocket. What came out was a leather badge holder, dark and worn at the edges from years of daily carry. Marcus flipped it open in a single practiced motion, and held it at chest height, so that both officers could read it without taking a step. The gold shield caught the morning light. "Chief of Police, Hargrove Police Department." Nobody spoke. That was the thing Marcus would remember long afterward. Not the expression on Carter's face. Not the way Rodriguez went absolutely still mid-step. Not even the sound that Deborah Collins made from the edge of the driveway. What he would remember was the silence. The absolute, vertiginous, total silence of a cul-de-sac, that had been full of noise and accusation and motion 30 seconds earlier, and was now as still as a held breath. Carter's hand dropped from his holster. The color left his face in a single, visible wave. Rodriguez had stopped moving entirely, one foot slightly forward, frozen mid-approach, like a man who had been paused by a remote control. Marcus let them look. He gave them enough time to read every word on that shield. Then he closed the badge holder and returned it to his pocket. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I have been the chief of police for this city for exactly 72 hours. I own this house. I have the documentation to prove it. And the two of you," he looked at Carter, then at Rodriguez, measuring each of them with a long, unhurried gaze, "are going to want to think very carefully about the last 10 minutes. Carter's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Chief, we didn't," the call said. "I know what the call said," Marcus replied. "I was standing right here when she made it." He picked up the box he had set down when Deborah Collins first crossed the street. He carried it to the front door. He used his key. He went inside. Not one of them moved until the door closed behind him. You already know this isn't over. Not even close. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Chapter 6 is where this flips from confrontation to consequence, and the consequences are ones these officers will not recover from. Monday came with the particular weight that Mondays carry, when everyone in a building knows something significant is about to happen and no one is yet allowed to acknowledge it. Officers Carter and Rodriguez had been told to report to the chief's office at 8 a.m. with no further detail. They had spent the entire weekend unable to sleep, each of them running Saturday morning on a continuous loop, looking for a version of it that came out differently. Neither had found one. Marcus was at his desk at 7:45. 3 things on the surface in front of him: a legal pad, a pen, and a small digital recorder that was already running when his assistant opened the door and showed the 2 officers in. He did not greet them. He gestured to the chairs. "I'm going to play you something," he said. He pressed a key on his laptop. Deborah Collins's 911 call filled the room, all of it, from the first sentence to the last, in her own unaltered voice. They listened without speaking. When it ended, Marcus played the body camera footage. 92 seconds of recording that showed, with the absolute unsparing clarity of a lens that has no opinion and no loyalty, exactly what had occurred in that driveway. The positioning, the refusal to examine documentation, the hand near the holster, all of it. He closed the laptop. "Here is what I need you to understand," he said. "I am not doing this because I am the chief of police and you humiliated me in my own driveway. I am doing this because the man you treated that way on Saturday morning could have been any black man in this city. And the training this department provides, training I have had a direct hand in designing, should have produced a different result. It didn't. I take that personally." He slid 2 envelopes across the desk. Administrative suspension pending internal affairs review. Badges and firearms to remain at headquarters. Neither officer argued. Carter's hand shook as he picked up the envelope. Rodriguez stared at the middle distance with the expression of a man watching 6 years of carefully built career dissolve, while he sat perfectly still. The badges stayed on the desk. Marcus waited until the door had fully closed, then sat quietly in his new office, the first office that had ever had his name on the door, and let himself feel the complete weight of what it meant that this had happened at all. The internal affairs investigation opened that same afternoon. By Wednesday, it had expanded in a direction no one had anticipated. Sergeant Patricia Howe, the 15-year veteran assigned to the case, pulled the incident report and cross-referenced the address in the complaint database. What she found made her sit back in her chair and read the results twice. 14 calls to the Hargrove PD non-emergency line over 31 years, all originating from 11 Sycamore Ridge Drive, the registered address of Deborah Ann Collins. 14 reports of suspicious individuals. 14 case files opened, investigated, and closed with no charges, no citations, and no wrongdoing found in any of them. A man visiting his sister. A teenager walking home from school. A licensed contractor doing work 3 houses down. A woman jogging on a public sidewalk. A delivery driver. 14 people stopped, questioned, and required to justify their presence on a street they had every legal right to be on. And in every single file without one exception, the described subject was black. The calls had never been connected because they had never been looked at together. They existed as 14 separate unrelated incidents, filed across different years, handled by different officers, quietly closed and quietly forgotten. No one had ever put them side by side and looked at what they formed together. Sergeant Howe did. She compiled a 14-page report and walked it personally to the chief's office. Marcus read it once, slowly. Then he read it again. Then he set it down and was silent for a long moment. "How was this never caught?" he said. "Not quite a question. Separate files. Different officers every time. The database wasn't built to surface patterns like this," Howe said. "No one ever pulled the thread. Until now," Marcus said. "Until now," she confirmed. He nodded. "Get the city attorney on the phone." The civil lawsuit was filed 12 days after the incident on Sycamore Ridge Drive. Marcus Bennett, plaintiff. Deborah Ann Collins, defendant. The charges: racial discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and knowingly filing a false police report. The suit sought $200,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. By Friday morning, it was on every local news channel. By Friday afternoon, it had been picked up nationally. By that evening, the body camera footage, 92 unedited seconds, had been viewed more than 4 million times. The story had everything it needed to travel: a documented pattern of bias, a victim with an unimpeachable record, footage that required no interpretation, and an irony so complete it fit in a single sentence. The woman who called the police on the police chief. Sycamore Ridge Drive changed almost overnight. News fans occupied the corner. Neighbors who had lived within 200 feet of Deborah Collins for decades discovered, with sudden urgency, that they had always had reservations about her. The HOA voted 9-1 to remove her as chair, the one dissenting vote being her own. 3 families on the street voluntarily contacted the Hargrove PD to formally withdraw past complaints they had filed. Deborah Collins did not leave her house for 9 days. Her attorney released a statement saying she had acted out of concern for her community. The statement was read, analyzed, and methodically dismantled within hours by people across the country who had seen the 92 seconds of footage. She settled out of court 11 weeks later. The financial terms were sealed. The apology was not. Per the conditions of the settlement, it was read aloud into the public record by her attorney in a courtroom that was standing room only, and it ran in full in the Hargrove Gazette the following morning. Marcus was not present for the reading. He did not need to be. Has someone ever questioned whether you belonged somewhere that was completely and legally yours? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone. And if this story has stayed with you, share it. The more people see it, the more it matters. 3 months after moving day, Marcus Bennett stood at a podium in the Hargrove City Hall press room. The mayor was to his left, the city attorney to his right, in front of him. Reporters, community members, cameras, and people who had driven across the city simply to be in the room when this happened. He had prepared remarks. He had written them himself and revised them 4 times over 3 evenings. He had read them aloud in his office the night before until every sentence said precisely what he meant it to say. But when he stood at that podium and looked out at the room, he placed the pages face down and spoke without them. "The deed should have been enough," he said. His voice was even and clear. "That is the sentence I keep returning to. I had the deed. I had the title. I had my name on every piece of documentation that exists to establish legal ownership of property in this country. And none of it was enough. Not because the documentation was insufficient, but because a man who looks like me, standing in a driveway in that neighborhood, was not extended the basic presumption of legitimacy that those documents were designed to provide. The badge changed the room. The deed should have." He paused. The room stayed quiet. "I want to say something honestly," he continued. "I am the chief of police. I carry a gold shield, and that shield, in my own driveway, functioned as a substitute for rights I already possessed before I ever entered law enforcement. That is not a tribute to what the badge represents. That is an indictment of a system that required it." What he announced was the Badge and Deed Reform Initiative, a comprehensive overhaul of department training protocols built on a single foundational principle: that documentation of ownership or lawful residence must be treated as presumptive evidence of legitimacy in any civilian encounter, and that the burden of establishing grounds for suspicion rests with the officer, not the resident. The initiative included mandatory implicit bias retraining for every active officer in the department, A redesigned complaint database with cross-referencing protocols designed to surface patterns of racially disparate reporting, and a citizen's rights card to be distributed in every precinct explaining plainly what a person is and is not required to do when approached by an officer on private property. Officers Carter and Rodriguez were not reinstated. Following the completion of the internal affairs review, Carter resigned, and Rodriguez was formally terminated. Both decisions were reviewed by an independent board and upheld. Marcus did not celebrate either outcome. He sat with both of them, the way he sat with every difficult outcome, and let them mean what they meant. He drove home that evening along a route that took him past neighborhoods. His department was responsible for past corners he had walked as a young officer, past blocks that had shaped his understanding of what policing could be and what it so often wasn't. He turned onto Sycamore Ridge Drive in late autumn, when the oaks had gone gold and the light came through them sideways, making the whole street look painted rather than real. He pulled into his driveway and sat a moment before going inside. He thought about his father. 40 years of excellent work in a city that decided, year after year, not to notice it. He thought about the framed closing document in the hallway, his name at the top of the page, in letters that did not waver. He got out of the car. He walked to the front door. He used his key. He went inside his home,